If you like fighting, you like the 1987 Stanley Cup semifinal matchup between Montreal and Philly. And this was the series I remember. And the funny thing is, the 1987 Philadelphia Flyers are kind of a wonder. They lose 3-0 in Game 1 against the Rangers in Round 1. This is the first year where Round 1 had a best-of-7 format. The NHL decided the best-of-5 format allowed way too many upsets. So they changed it to best-of-7 to make it so upsets are less likely. The 90s Detroit Red Wings called and said it didn't work. But in the first round, they lose to the Rangers 3-0. Then they beat them 8-3. They win 3-0 in Game 3. They lose 6-3. They win 3-1. They win 5-0. So yeah, if it was best of 5, the Rangers would have won. Worked for Philly. Didn't work for some other teams. So I don't think the number of games necessarily mean that you're going to lack upsets. Anything past one game, and one game is just flip a coin. New York Islanders in the second round, this was a battle. And this was as the Islanders are declining, but they're still playing well enough and they're still putting up the kind of point totals. There's still some hope that maybe they can get back and win another cup. Philly wins 4-2 in Game 1, loses Game 2 2-1, wins 4-1, 6-4, loses 2-1, loses 4-2. Almost choked away a 3-1 series lead, but in Game 7 they win 5-1 on the strength of a goalie. A goalie we'll talk about, because in Round 3, they win 4-3 in overtime, they lose 5-2, they win 4-3, they win 6-3, and then on home ice they lost 5-2. And I remember Montreal leaving the ice at the end of that game, and there was some fighting and some unhappiness and some unpleasantness between the teams. Chris Chelios didn't get along very well with the Flyers that year. Chris Nyland, there was a lot of them. And it all led up to Game 6. Game 6 was won by Philly 4-3. But the score and the fact the series was over was beside the point. Because Montreal and Philly, the hatred boiled over on the ice. And we saw a brawl that was so bad that the NHL came out after that game and said, that's it. And there's actually a video on the channel which I talk about that brawl and everything that happened and how what did it for Montreal was seeing Larry Robinson get punched in the face, because Larry Robinson was one of the gentlemen of the game, and that was kind of it for Montreal, and everything went off. And then Claude Lemieux had this thing he would do where during practice he would shoot the puck. At the end of practice, he'd shoot the puck from center ice into the opposing team's net. And Philly had told him, don't do that. Philly dressed a few extra guys for the warm-up, and sure enough, Claude Lemieux took that shot at the empty net, and all hell broke loose. And the hate in that series was palpable. And you go from that series to then the Edmonton series, where it wasn't as bad, but there was a Broad Street Bullies feel to this Flyers team. In the finals, it came out again, but not as much in fighting as just that physical, grinding game. They lose Game 1 4-2. They lose Game 2 in overtime 3-2. They won Game 3 5-3. They lose Game 4 4-1. So they're down 3-1. But that physical, bruising nature of their game allowed them to start to take over the series. Game 5, they win 4-3. Game 6, they won 3-2. And I remember I was stunned seeing the Philadelphia Flyers come back and force a Game 7. I was not necessarily a fan of Philly because of the way that the team played, their Broad Street Bullies feel, and because of the fact the fans had thrown a large amount of beer during the brawl around the end of Game 5. So this was before Game 6, which was in Montreal. And I didn't want to see Philly win anything. I had been on the fence about Philly. I didn't care one way or the other. This was the year that made me say, wow, I don't want to see them win. And yet, when they lost Game 7 3-1, Ron Hextall winning the Conn Smythe was a no-brainer. He was the MVP for them in important games. And Ron Hextall, as a rookie, he was number 2 in the race for Calder, won the Vezina. So he wins best goalie in the NHL, almost best rookie. Who was the best rookie that year? Luc Robitaille with the LA Kings. He's number 9 in voting for the Hart. His first year in the NHL, he's number 9 in voting for the Hart. He played 67 games and had 37 wins that year. Played fantastic. In the playoffs for scoring, the Flyers had Brian Propp leading the way with 12 goals and 16 assists. Pelle Eklund, 7 goals and 20 assists. For anybody who's gone to the Eklund Rumor website, that's where he gets his name from. Rick Tocchet, 11 goals and 10 assists. Doug Crossman, 4 goals and 14 assists. Tim Kerr, 8 goals and 5 assists. He only played 12 games those playoffs. That member of my Hall of Fame got hurt a lot. Peter Zezel, 3 goals and 10 assists. Mark Howe, 2 goals and 10 assists. The only Hall of Famer on this team. Derek Smith, 6 goals and 4 assists. Scott Mellenby, 5 goals and 5 assists. Lindsey Carson, 3 goals and 5 assists. Brad McCrimmon, 3 goals and 5 assists. McCrimmon was as tough as they got. Really was. Hextall in net, 15 and 11 with a 2.76 goals against and a 908 save percentage. 2.76 and 908 now means your team's going home, and they're complaining about the goaltender. He cost us the series. Back then, 906 and 908 save percentages in that region, pretty darn good. Chico Resch retired after this season. Chico was the backup. Bob Fraze was the number 3 goalie, or Bob Froze as we call him back then. I know it's Fraze, now it's Byron Fraze. Anyways, Froze was the backup goalie. He only played 3 games, or he was number 3 goalie, only played 3 games that year, but Chico retired. 1.96 goals against a 909 save percentage in the playoffs when he did show up twice in relief of Ron Hextall. Hextall played his ass off that year. And there was really a belief coming out of this season that Hextall at some point would lift the Stanley Cup. It was just a matter of when. The funny thing is, that was the most games he ever played in his career. It was the most wins he ever had in a season in his career. And I'm 99% sure that was his only Vezina. And I'm just thinking, I don't think he ever won the Vezina again. So the coming out of 85, so I did the 85 video a couple days ago where Pelle Lindbergh had passed away in November of that year. And that was coming out of this great season that he'd had and this great future that he had. Hextall comes in and softens that blow quite a bit because he's a fantastic goalie too. Did he raise the bar too much? Probably. He had 6 assists in the regular season that year. He hadn't scored his goal yet. He was the first goalie to hit one into the empty net. So actually score a goal, not just get credit for it. It was an intimidating team. This is the last time that the Flyers would go back to the final for a while. But it was a team that looked like they would go back. And it's funny because I do talk about how I wasn't a fan of that Flyers team. But I loved Mark Howe. I loved Brian Propp. And I loved Tim Kerr. Those were 3 players I liked a lot. And Brian Propp is a guy who's on the short list for inclusion into the Hockey Guy Hall of Fame at some point too. So this was an incredible run, 26 games. That's 2 below the maximum you can play in a playoffs. And they still had the energy to push the Edmonton Oilers to 7 games. And this was the Oilers at their best. The 87 and the 88 Oilers was probably the most machine-like that they looked. And Edmonton got pushed to the limit by the Flyers. So there you go. Something to debate about, I guess. You guys can talk about it in the comment section below, whether this was the end of the Broad Street Bullies. Was this Bobby Clarke bringing it back? Mike Keenan was the first coach to win 40 games in a season for his first 3 years. That mark, of course, would happen now, I would think, pretty regularly, just because it's not that hard for teams to get to 40 wins, not like it was back then before the overtime and shootout wins scenarios. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And this has been the 1987 Philadelphia Flyers.